Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Stephanie.
I'm Tom.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about something that is important in society.
Yep.
So that matters to people everywhere.
Right. So we're talking about something called Juneteenth, which is kind of a new word. It's a blend of words. I think we have a term in English called portmanteau,
We do.
where you take parts of different words and put them together to create a new word. And the word we're talking about is Juneteenth, which is June 19th, kind of smudged together, Juneteenth. And we're looking back and we're marching forward at the same time.
That's right. So we're going to take a look back in history and then move forward and see what we're doing about this particular holiday it is now, what we're doing about this particular issue currently, at least in the States. So listen quickly and we'll be back.
Juneteenth, a term blending June and 19th, represents a significant chapter in American history. Also known as Freedom Day or Emancipation Day, this annual celebration is observed by African Americans to commemorate the end of slavery in the U.S. The origins of Juneteenth date back to June 19, 1865. When the U.S.'s Northern Army arrived in Texas, its general, Gordon Granger, announced the freedom of all its slaves. Although President Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation had officially freed slaves in the southern states as early as 1863, slow communication and resistance in some regions postponed their actual liberation. It wasn't until the Northern troops arrived in Texas, the most remote of the slave states, that the proclamation was fully enforced in the states that fought against the U.S. government. However, abolishing slavery didn't immediately lead to equal treatment for African Americans. Initially, Juneteenth was not an official holiday and was celebrated in small, community-focused ways. It was only in 1980 that Texas officially recognized Juneteenth as a state holiday. Even in recent years, incidents of racial discrimination in the U.S. continue to surface. With the emergence of contemporary movements like Black Lives Matter, Juneteenth has gained national attention. In 2021, the U.S. government officially passed a bill making Juneteenth a federal holiday. Though it took over 150 years, this landmark decision represents a commitment to acknowledge the country's troubled past and ensure human rights for all. Juneteenth is a powerful reminder of the continuous work needed to promote justice and equality. Okay, everybody, it's time for us to discuss the contents of today's lesson. Again, we're talking about society in the month of June. And we're talking about Juneteenth, which is today, June 19th. And we're looking back, but we're marching forward at the same time. I suppose if you are marching forward and looking back, you may have to turn around from time to time to make sure you're not going to bump into anything. But the point here is that we're looking back on the past to see what we've learned in order to move forward.
That's right. So we're going to be talking about something called Juneteenth. And you're right, this word looks strange, because it was just kind of made up or created recently. Not so recent, but it really wasn't something I'd even heard about until a couple of years ago. I guess it's been 5 or 6 maybe. But anyway, Juneteenth is, as Tom said, a term where they blend June and 19th together because the date that we're going to be talking about happened on June 19th. That's the date of this particular chapter in American history, as they say. So this represents a significant time in American history. This was back in the 1800s. We can also refer to this particular event or chapter or date in our history as Freedom Day or Emancipation Day. I've heard it called Emancipation Day. I'd never heard of Juneteenth as a young person going to school, none of it. But then about 5 years ago, I had heard of Emancipation Day. That's a big date in American history because that's when our president, Abraham Lincoln, in 1863, he signed this declaration. It's called a proclamation where you tell everybody what's going to happen. And he said all the slaves in any state are now officially free. So that was a big date in American history. So this is an annual celebration, and it's observed by African Americans to commemorate or celebrate the end of slavery in the U.S.
Right, and we have this holiday to commemorate the end of slavery in the U.S. To commemorate means you remember something, and then you show respect for that thing. And we do this a lot of times. Sometimes we have holidays or special days to commemorate the end of a war or something like that, or to commemorate a certain starting of a company or whatever, a start of school or whatever.
Yeah.
And we're recognizing this happened, and we're talking about slavery, which is a system in which people are owned by other people and forced to work for them, usually in very harsh conditions. A person who is owned by someone else is called a slave, but the whole system is called slavery.
Yeah, even today we have slavery in the world. Even in America, we have a lot of people being trafficked. Human trafficking is where they take people and they sell them to other people. They have no freedom. Sometimes they're drugged. Sometimes they use them for sex. It's a bad situation. So slavery is still in existence in America and the rest of the world, sadly. But we're going to be talking about this particular period of time in America. So that's what slavery is. You are owned by other people. You have no freedom, and they don't pay you. So it's a horrible, horrible thing that people do to other people. Let's talk about the origins. How did this begin? Well, the origins of Juneteenth date back to June 19th, 1865, when the U.S.'s Northern Army arrived in Texas. They had a general leading the army. His name was Gordon Granger, and that's when he announced the freedom of all its slaves. Now, Abraham Lincoln had actually signed the Emancipation Proclamation 2 years earlier, but the slaves in the South, they were not let go of. We called that the Confederate States. They were trying to fight to keep their slaves because they made more money if they could use free humans to pick their crops in the South.
Yeah, of course, proclamation was signed in 1863 when the Civil War was still going on.
Yeah.
So the southern states probably said, nope, we're not going to recognize that. Who do you think we are? We like our slaves. We need to produce the cotton, et cetera, et cetera.
They thought they'd win, too.
They certainly most did. And, of course, we're talking about another event when the U.S.'s Northern Army, they arrived in Texas, and the general of that army, Gordon Granger, told all the people in Texas, hey, all the slaves here in Texas are going to be free.
Yeah.
People in Texas probably weren't very happy about that. Texans are very independent-minded. Who are you, a Yankee, telling us what we're going to do with our slaves? But the law is the law, and they had to recognize the loss of the Civil War. The Confederate States all lost the Civil War, and they had to recognize this proclamation.
As we mentioned before, President Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, which was signed in 1863, had officially freed the slaves. Freed is the past tense. So free, to be freed, is somebody giving you your freedom. He had officially freed the slaves in the southern states as early as 1863, January 1st, actually. But they blamed slow communication and resistance. I think it was more of a problem of resistance in some regions for having postponed the slaves actually being let go and having their freedom. Resistance is the noun form of the verb to resist, which means to fight against something you don't want. Sometimes I resist going to the dentist because I hate it. But sometimes you just need to go with it. Well, here, resistance is the noun form. It just talks about the activity of fighting against something that you don't want. So there was a lot of resistance in some regions. I think our author is referring to the southern part of the United States. The slaves in the north had had their freedom for a while.
Indeed, and of course, Texas is a big state, so of course they had to get the message spread out to all different parts of Texas, like to El Paso and Amarillo. and Lubbock and all those different places. And so resistance continued for a while until they gradually accepted the situation. And then this led to the slaves' actual liberation. Liberation, of course, is when you're freed. You have liberty. You are a free person. And, of course, so that means that probably slaves were continuing to work on plantations in Texas well after the end of the Civil War until that Northern Army arrived and said, hey, you guys are free, and now you've got to go find your own jobs.
Yeah, if the military is telling you to do something, you know it's serious. So I'm sure that they let them go because they didn't want to be arrested or maybe even shot for keeping these African Americans slaves. So let's look at this word emancipation. To emancipate. Emancipate's a verb. It just means to set something free, especially from legal or social or political restrictions. Emancipation is the noun form. Proclamation. We actually use the verb proclaim quite a bit. It's usually in some official capacity that someone is announcing something that's official. You know, they're going to, this country's proclaiming war, or to proclaim independence, to say I'm free. So you're announcing something in kind of an official way. You're declaring something to be true.
Exactly. So you can have proclamations in the government. For example, the government will announce the addition of new territory or something like that. Mm-hmm. And, of course, when I see the word proclamation, I almost always think of this particular event in history, the proclamation for emancipation, or more officially, the Emancipation Proclamation. And again, it was signed or promoted by Abraham Lincoln, and it went into effect, at least in the North, in 1863, but down in 1865 in Texas, they finally accepted it because there was poor communication and resistance. And again, some regions actually postponed their liberation. It wasn't until the Northern troops arrived in Texas, the most remote of the slave states, that the proclamation was fully enforced in the states that fought against the U.S. government. Now, of course, if a government has a law, it's no good unless it is enforced. Okay, you have to have people get arrested for breaking the law. I can't help but think that there are lots of traffic laws in Taiwan that the police are powerless to enforce because there are just too many scooters, too many cars, and they just can't catch everybody. It's very difficult to enforce the traffic laws here.
Yeah, we're discovering in America right now that if the police or the courts don't want to enforce a law, that things can become quite lawless. So you can have all the laws you want, but if they're not enforced by whoever's in power, then they're really kind of meaningful or meaningless. And in the South, they just weren't paying any attention to that Emancipation Proclamation. They kept their slaves busy and working as long as they could.
Okay, that brings us to the midway point in our lesson for today. Let's take a break and listen to our Chinese teacher.
听众朋友大家好，我是安娜。我们今天要来带大家看美国的一个节日，叫做六月节。不过这篇文章我们设计成综合测验，也就是克漏字，所以我们会边看文章边带大家来做题目。那这个六月节啊，在文章第一段的第一句就告诉我们叫做 Juneteenth。这个 Juneteenth 到底是什么呢？既然叫做六月节，其实它是6月跟19的一个结合。在第一段第一句告诉我们，它其实是一个 term， 就是一个词汇 which 或者是 that blends， 把什么跟什么融合在一起呢？它就是把6月跟19，也就是说6月19就是所谓的六月节啦。那在美国的历史当中，它是一个很重要的篇章。怎么说呢？因为第一段的第二句告诉我们，这个每年一度的庆祝活动其实也被称为自由日啦，或者是解放日。所以在第二句这边看到的 Freedom Day 或者是 Emancipation Day 这个解放日要特别注意一下，不管说是六月节或者是 Freedom Day 或者是 Emancipation Day 都指的是6月19号的这个节日。那这个节日到底是要用来庆祝什么呢？其实这个六月节它是要来庆祝纪念美国奴隶制度的什么东西。当然关键字这个 slavery 一定要注意啦，也就是在第一题空格之后 of slavery， 我们大家对于美国的历史都会有一些了解，所以美国的奴隶制度的 一个结束，如果根据我们这一个背景知识的话，文章就算是上下文没有特别的说明，根据我们的背景常识，应该可以选得出来，就是一个 D 的答案，就是为了要纪念 slavery 奴隶制度的一个 end 的结束，所以第一题答案选 D。 那接下来我们就看到第二段咯。我们如果要提到一个节日的话，通常会谈谈这个节日它是什么样的一个历史跟由来，所以第二段一开始就告诉我们六月节它的起源其实就可以追溯到1865年的6月19。当时是什么情况呢？当时就是美国的北方军他抵达德州，然后将军呢就宣布所有的奴隶重获自由了。不过你这时候觉得好像怪怪的，因为如果你历史真的很熟的话，其实早在1863年林肯总统他就已经有一个解放宣言，对不对？不过当时因为通讯缓慢啦，然后有一些地方又有抵抗，所以奴隶的这个实际的解放是被推迟，是没有错。那不过我们在这边第二段的第三句要特别注意一下，第三句的最后面的地方啊，有一个 as early as， 这边就是我们刚刚讲的林肯总统不是早就在1863年就有说有解放宣言吗？这里的 as early as 它就是早至早到1863年就已经有解放宣言了，所以这句话整个就把一个推迟的原因做一个说明。不过我们看到第四句也是题目的第二题，这里选一个 until 啊，我们要特别来讲解一下，因为如果你对于所谓的强调句或分裂句不熟悉的话，这一题几乎是没有办法作答的哦。我们先把第二段第四句的 it was 跟逗点之后的 that 先把它抓出来。那这个所谓的强调句或者是分裂句，基本上它有强调的功能，但是为什么叫分裂句呢？因为它把原本完整的句子做一个分裂。分裂什么？也就是其实句子本来从 not 跟第二题答案第一选项的 until 跟 that 之后面全面这个句子，全部的句子它原本是一个完整的句子。我们先看这个简化的完整句子，这个句子本来就是说，本来说的是北方军队到达德州的时候，这个奴隶制度当中最偏远的这个德州，解放宣言就在那边得以完全实施。那这个 until 的用法其实是 until 加上时间，但是句子要写时间之前发生了什么事情，也就是说北方军到达德州是一个时间点，但是到达时间到这个解放军到达的德州之前，解放宣言并没有完全的被实施，所以句子本来应该要写成，我们从 that 后面开始看哦。The proclamation was not fully enforced in the states， 加上时间 until the northern troops arrive in Texas。 这个是我把句子先稍微做一个简化，句子其实本来要讲的就是解放宣言没有完全的实施，一直到北方军到达德州之后，全国才真正做了所谓的解放。那在这里呢，就是把我们要强调的时间点，北方军到达德州，抓到 it was 跟 that 的中间，强调这个时间点。不过通常 not 跟 until 都会放在一起的，所以我们把 not 也一起抓出来，所以后面我们才会看到的是肯定句哦。 that 再加上解放宣言 the proclamation was fully enforced。 当然这边句子还是有点长啦，长的是什么呢？因为有一个同位语，同位语出现在 Texas 德州之后的逗点跟逗点中间，那这边只是特别强调一下哦，德州总而言之呢，就是那些有实行奴隶制度的最南方的那一州。好，句子最后面有一个限定用法关系子句哦，从 that 一直到句尾的地方修饰的是 the states， 那一些州。哪些州呢？就是反抗美国政府军的那一些州。
We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back, guys. We're talking about Juneteenth. It's an official federal holiday in America now. It used to be known as Freedom Day or Emancipation Day, especially by those who were African Americans, and they wanted to commemorate or celebrate this very important date in the lives of their relatives, their ancestors. This was a while ago because it commemorated or celebrated the end of slavery or them being owned by other people and not having their freedom in the U.S. So the origins we talked about date back to June 19th, 1865. Juneteenth is not the date when Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. They had to wait 2 more years to get their true freedom because in the southern part of the U.S., they were still fighting a civil war over this and other things, and they just didn't want to obey anything. They thought they would win the war and be able to keep hold of all their slaves so that they could work in their fields, especially the tobacco fields and cotton fields. So 2 years later, in 1865, a general went down to Texas, and he kind of had to enforce this Emancipation Proclamation, tell them, as of right now, those slaves are free in Texas. They still were being forced to work. But when the military comes, you know, they mean business. It's serious now, and you can't mess around. So that's when they officially got their freedom. And so that date, and it's the date we now celebrate as Juneteenth, is June 19th, 1865.
Exactly. So, of course, slavery was abolished, but after they were free, they had other problems, but we'll talk about that some other day. Moving on now to the third paragraph. However, abolishing slavery didn't immediately lead to equal treatment for African Americans. So if you abolish something, you get rid of something, usually a law. You might have some unfair laws, and the government eventually abolishes those laws because the people don't like them. They're not popular laws.
You have to protest before that happens, though.
Yep, and you probably have heard about many laws here in Taiwan that were abolished over time as democracy continued to move forward.
Yeah.
And indeed, slavery's abolition, that's the noun form, didn't lead to the equal treatment of African Americans right away. Some people would say they're still not being treated equally. And initially, or at least at the beginning, Juneteenth was not an official holiday and was celebrated in small, community-focused ways. So, yes, at the beginning, Juneteenth really wasn't known about by a lot of people. They probably knew the date. June 19th is supposed to represent the day the slaves were freed. But celebrations did not occur all over the place. It only was celebrated in community-focused ways, probably in small communities with large black populations. They got together to celebrate the event, but white people either didn't want to celebrate along with them, or they didn't even know it existed.
Well, it was kind of a community celebration at first, and it started in churches. I saw a documentary about this about a year ago, I guess. I'd never heard of Juneteenth, so I watched it. I'm like, where does this come from? And they would have these celebrations in smaller communities. They'd get together, and it started out in churches, and then it turned into a food fair. So they would have, a whole day where they would block off a street and have a food fair celebrating, and everybody was invited, but it was put on by the African Americans in the community. And then it just got bigger and bigger. So Juneteenth was not an official holiday when it first started, and, it started in very small ways. It was celebrated, like I said, in small community-focused ways, especially in church groups. There's actually a church in Texas where it was officially recognized, and that was the first place they ever had a celebration, and it was kind of fun to go back and see that old church that's still standing. It was only in 1980 that Texas officially recognized Juneteenth as a state holiday. So this is a place where it originated, and you would have thought, oh, they probably made this a holiday a long time ago. Because in America, states can come up with laws before the federal government. In fact, states are supposed to have most of the power in America, but now it's, turned into the reverse. But a state can make a holiday if they want, and then they can reject a holiday if they want. It's up to the state. So Texas was the first state, and it should have been because that's where it originated. So it took quite a while for them even to get a state holiday. That was back in 1980. I guess that was a while ago, but Seems like it was just yesterday.
Indeed. And going on to the next paragraph here, it says, even in recent years, incidents of racial discrimination in the U.S. continue to surface. So we've got these incidents or happenings or events of racial discrimination. Discrimination, of course, is when you judge someone for some particular reason, their race or their gender or their age or whatever. And so we have racial discrimination in which people are not allowing certain peoples of a race to do something. We would say discrimination of whites against blacks or whatever. And the incidents continue to surface. An incident, again, is when something happens, and we hear about them quite often.
Oh, yeah. And there's discrimination everywhere. I remember when I was first in Taiwan, there was a lot of discrimination against Koreans in Taiwan. And I wasn't used to that. I thought, oh, I just thought America discriminated. No, every country has their preference in some little group. For some reason, we can't all unify and be together. So that's a problem. So, yeah, there were incidents. An incident is an interesting word, guys. We usually use it in more of a negative way or an unpleasant reference. Oh, it was an incident. The police were called to an incident on Main Street last night. We don't know if it turned into a crime or whatever. We just know that it probably isn't a good thing, an incident. So there were different episodes or incidents of racial discrimination in the U.S., and it says here they continue to surface. With the emergence means for something to come out. So the emergence of the sun yesterday made everyone really happy. When we go through those long weeks of no sun and it's just rainy and cold in the winter, I think it's hard on people. But when you see the emergence of the sun, it makes everybody's, their mood perk up, feel a lot happier.
Yep, so we've got various political movements or actions being happening, taking place, such as Black Lives Matter. And with those movements taking place or with them emerging, Juneteenth has gained national attention. Everybody in the country now knows about Juneteenth. And in 2021, the U.S. government officially passed a bill making Juneteenth a federal or national holiday. So as you were saying earlier, we have a difference, a division in the U.S. between the federal government and state governments. And states can establish their own laws with a lot of things, but not with others. And this is a holiday that is supposed to be valid all throughout the country.
Yeah, if the Congress in D.C. passes a federal law, then all the states have to obey. So it's now a federal holiday. It took over 150 years, but this landmark decision represents a commitment to acknowledge the country's troubled past and hopefully ensure human rights for all. When you look at this word landmark, you think of Taipei 101 or some famous building or street or maybe a big tree that everybody knows about. That's a landmark that people look to. But if it's a landmark decision or a landmark success in some sort of process, it just means it's a really important turning point for something along the way of something progressing where people go, that was important. When we did this, it changed everything.
Indeed. So, of course, it's a big landmark in American history, and it represents a commitment to acknowledge the country's troubled past and to ensure human rights for all in the future. Now, Juneteenth is a powerful reminder of the continuous work needed to promote justice and equality. Continuous just means something keeps on going. It doesn't stop. Because this needs to continue to work forward. There's never really going to be a day when there isn't any racial discrimination, but we can take steps to make things better, day by day, year by year, or whatever. Okay, that brings us to the end of our explanation for today. Here comes our Chinese teacher.
好，在刚才那一句呢，我们都讲解完毕之后啊，就进入到了文章的第3段。当然我们如果看到4段的文章啊，有时候真的就是用起承转合这样子的文意作为一个串联。像第3段一开始就出现了一个 however， 对不对？这个 however 啊，我们常常会说只要是 however 之后通常都会是文意的重点，没错。然而这重点是什么呢？废除奴隶制度啊，其实没有立即为了非裔美人啊带来平等的待遇。所以到了第2句，我们看了一个 副词不晓得是最初还是现在还是最近还是到最后。句子继续看的话，可以发现6月节不是官方的节日，是比较小型社区为中心的方式来庆祝。而到了第3句的时候，又特别出现了这个 it was 跟 that 的强调句或分裂句，所以这个地方也可以把它框起来哦。强调的是时间，就只有在1980年的时候 that 怎样，德州才终于承认这个6月节是州定的假日。也就是说，回过头到第2题，一开始的时候其实就小型的，后来才变成州定的假日，所以有这种文意的转折。第3题答案选 A。 好，接着我们就看到第4段咯。第4段特别就谈到现在的状况，那当然现在几乎已经是对于这种种族歧视我们的这个意识啊，跟我们的做法都很多，可是就算是在最近几年，美国仍然还是不断出现一些种族歧视的事件。比如说像是在第4段第2句这个地方，我们看到画底线的 Black Lives Matter， 黑人的命也是命啊，当时的那个新闻呢也是闹得沸沸扬扬的。不过呢，在2021年的时候，美国政府终于就通过一个法案，这个法案呢就将6月节定为联邦的假日。所以从一开始小型社区为中心的方式来庆祝，到了1980年德州承认6月节是州定假日，一直到第4段的第3句，美国把6月节定为联邦假日，全国的一个假日。所以第3题这个第4段的第3句要特别注意，这边有一个限定用法的关系子句简化，先行词是 a bill， 这里的 bill 就是法案的意思，而 making 还原是 which 或者是 that 跟 made made 过去式。那当然我们对于不管是任何肤色的这个人民，或者是不管是任何的种族，我们都要有这种人人平等的概念。所以6月节其实是一种强而有力的提醒，也就是我们必须要促进正义，促进平等。以上是我们今天的讲解，我是安娜，我们下次见。
That's it for today, guys. That's our society unit. Hope you learned quite a bit about some American history. We hope you'll join us again soon for more English Digest. I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Tom. Goodbye.
Bye.